Excellent. Awesome. Thanks everyone for attending today. I'm going to close up my chat window so I can see more of the screen. So today we're going to focus on research and scholarship services, which we've heard about before, and we're going to get into how they connect us to services. Before we do get started, this is just a quick notice that the webinar is going to be recorded. So if you have questions or comments, they'll be captured in the window, or our dialogue here if you're going to talk, as well as your name and organization. So if this is not comfortable for you, we're going to ask you to disconnect from the call because we're going to proceed and do our recording. The recording will be posted a little while after the call happens. We do want to trim a couple of the extra pieces off of it as well, just to make it a little bit more brief. And with that, let's get started. So one of the things that we do is we try to give people context to the conversation of dealing with Federation. I recognize a number of people on the call today, and I think many of the people on the call today are sort of in this zone of activity. This is the maturity model that we work with, and we work with many institutions across the spectrum, from early adopters out here, orchestrating their applications together, and then centralizing to a single sign-on area on campus. And with the ORCID conversation, this is how being part of the Canadian Access Federation gives you access to more services than you are able to stand up on your own. So you access these services in real time or have them available to you through the Access Federation. And this is what we're going to be talking about. It's one of the services today and some of the mechanics behind the scenes. What I also like to do with any conversation that we go through with single sign-on is just do a quick walkthrough on the experience, because not everyone is really familiar with how access to services work in a federated context. So this progress path of a click-through story is a user wants to access a service. In this case, we're going to focus on ORCID today. They're going to go through a discovery service that reveals which institution that they're at. And once the user says, yes, that's my institution, the verification of that being a true blue and a bona fide service happens when the IDP looks at our metadata. The Canadian Access Federation publishes a trusted address set, and then it reveals or allows the IDP to show the user ID and password page on presenting the next step of the process is the actual user signing in. This is a really important aspect because this user ID and password page is hosted on your site. You have autonomous control over it. And in the previous slide where you saw a single sign-on being the amalgamation happening, is many applications sometimes render a user ID and password page and sometimes go back to an LDAP server on each application. So each application has visibility to that user ID and password credential. But in a federated context, only a single point has, which is the IDP. What happens then is the attributes go across the wire, the assertion and all the associated things, and the validation happens. And this is literally where the trust is present and manifest in the Access Federation with regards to accessing services. The other thing that happens across the wire, and I do want to offer questions being available anytime. Eric, who's sitting beside me, has a watchful eye on our chat window in case there's any questions. So if there's something you need more clarification on, please let us know. Another thing that we also have a conversation about with many organizations is, what about the attributes? Where do they come from? Where do they go? And it starts with the system of record, and essentially the system, like a directory, Active Directory, is usually what the identity provider is connected to. And inside AD is essentially what I would consider the truth of the institution. So this is who is a true blue student, staff, faculty, or alum, has those account, has the attributes that come from your system of record. It's held in a directory information tree, a structured data set. And what happens is when the attribute release goes across the wire, it gets that rich description gets flattened out just to a set of attributes in a known consistent format. And then they're unmarshaled, and the application gets the attributes, and then it does whatever it's going to do with them. Usually there's an access control decision There's the authentication happens over here, but the authorization is really at the end service or signaled to the end service, and then it persists something inside the application. And when we talk about the span of control over the data dictionary, this is about what attributes does my application need or does it require to operate? And that's what the research and scholarship set helps with, is instead of having a very bespoke environment and just a very custom attribute 1, custom attribute 2, custom attribute 3, it's a very known dictionary, and that's part of being part of the Federation. You have access to that to populate the information. Does anyone have any questions here at this early stage? If not, we'll keep on going. I'll give it a moment. Going once, going twice. Great, everyone's learned up. There you go. So entity categories, how do they work? When we look at attributes to services, what happens in practice is an identity provider writes a rule and says, give this set of attributes to this service provider. And then you get another question a few weeks later and saying, oh, we need to connect this service up. We need to release attributes to that service too. And someone signs into the machine, someone writes the attribute rule, say, when I see this service, send email, a common name, and the affiliation of the organization. And then a couple weeks later, days, hours, what have you, again, the question comes in, please release the attributes. And so this is the cost of ownership of doing things one at a time, or a one-to-end relationship. And for a number of years, when federated identity was very new, over a decade and a half ago, this was novel, and this is standard business now. And this is also where the effort and the sustaining something is. So it's fine grain and high effort, which is okay, but there's a better way, and entity categories offer a better way of doing this. And simply put, entity categories are like doing things with groups. So we deal with groups of things. And what happens is, in the entity category way of thinking about attribute release, is the identity provider writes a policy against the category and says, if I see this category, I'm going to release this set of attributes. And that's really critical, because then we've just turned the paradigm of this attribute release model from one identity provider to one service provider each and every time, to the identity provider to writing a general rule to the category or the group of services. And we call these the research and scholarship entity category. And this is a entity category that was created not by Canary or Canadian Access Federation, by an international body called REFEDS, Research and Education Federations, of which we belong to, as well as many others. And through the use of the entity category, we can really give a big lift to having one policy enable for many destinations or many endpoints. Chris, we have a question. Sure. So, are there any other entity categories in use in EduGame was one of the questions. There are, but what we're seeing is we're starting with a research and scholarship entity category first to decorate the Canadian Access Federation metadata. And we'll get into, you'll see examples of what other entity categories other federations use. And since we're on a global stage, you're acting locally but working globally. And what that means is you're going to see other entity categories from other federations. Are they immediately relevant to Canada and Canadian Access Federation? Not necessarily. So we know that Sweden has certain entity categories. There's entity categories in Europe that are per country for GDPR for some of the privacy settings. So this is a way that federations use, or a technique that we use, to decorate the metadata for attribute release. The other thing to note is that over the next couple of years, that the entity category adoption has been really growing. It's kind of plateaued a little bit, but we're still on a really good growth curve. We want to continue that. And for us here in the Canadian Access Federation, that growth we want to have definitely on the identity provider side, as you'll see. I see a flashing thing. Is there any other questions? Okay, perfect. All right. I better get rid of the flashing. So what's in the entity category set? So it's the attribute bundle. So there's a personal identifier, and there's an opportunity to use a pseudo-anonymous identifier, and then there's the affiliation. So the personal identifiers are email address, person name, and something in the vocabulary we call eduperson principal name. We won't necessarily get into the actual depth of the vocabulary right now. We're going to keep this pretty high level because we're going to be focused on services. Yeah. And the minimum set that that R&S requires is eduperson principal name, a unique identifier, so it's that unique ID, and then at your scope, the domain, in my case, it's Phillips at canary.ca, is my eduperson principal name. And they're not to be confused with email address, which is a separate record or attribute. The display name or given name are also instrumental here. And if there's if that organization does any reuse, that the eduperson targeted ID, which is an opaque identifier, is calculated. I see a couple other questions flashing. Thanks. Can you just put that here? I'll just do that. Are there any other entity categories that we should be? No. Can service providers influence their discovery service listings by scoping only those IDPs that honor the R&S entity category? The short answer is yes. A handful of services do that for the convenience of the user, and we'll get into that in just a few minutes. And actually, we'll see some of that behavior out there as well. Pardon me, I think my screen just locked. There we go. Okay. So we talked a little bit about the technical parts, but what about the business part of the research and scholarship category? How does it actually get uncovered and get used in practice? So what happens is you in the field, you as IDP operators and your institution evaluate the value to your institution, and we believe there's a significant amount of value here to be able to unlock these services. We also believe that the practice around the research and scholarship assignment of the tag by us here in Canada, as well as observing the other ones assigned worldwide, because everyone uses the same practices and procedures, that they meet the expectations of transparency and clarity around privacy and what is there. We do suggest that organizations looking to adopt this just review it against your existing privacy policies and the way you manage your data collection and sharing. This is coming to a more crisp focus with the EU GDPR, General Data Protection Requirements, or Act, that is coming out actually in a matter of days. And this is a healthy time to review it. And next, after you've reviewed that and say, yep, we're ready to go, you would submit the application for adding the R&S tag to the entity category. So this is sort of the procedure bit from the business workflow as opposed to the technical, which is sometimes lost in our calls occasionally because not all organizations know where to go to next on the process. So we have some recommendations for those adopters. Have an opinion on privacy. We know institutions have a privacy policy. We know that organizations publish white pages for their staff and faculty, and there's a lot of attribute release already going on. So R&S attributes are generally deemed acceptable for public consumption. We also know that, and also from past experience, that is curators of the data and student data, that you have obligations to your population on your campuses. And we believe that those are already have a place to be enshrined in your terms of usage or the computer user code of ethics that you have available to you when people get their accounts. So many institutions already have an opinion. This just reinforces the need there. On a rollout side of things, if someone is not already with the Canadian Access Federation, we strongly suggest that as you have your rollout plan, that you immediately turn on R&S, and the facility for that. We'll get into a little bit of the technical on those pieces in just a few moments. But the IDP installer that we have automatically installs it, as well as the ADFS toolkit. If you're an existing CAF or FIM service, we'll just pop out of the presentation in a moment. We'll look at the website where to go, and the application process could be as short as 2 weeks. We definitely want to shoot better than that, but we want to also manage people's expectations. So the location to get access to the category is really basically down here at the very bottom. I'll jump out of my browser. We'll jump into it. So this is the join page for the Canadian Access Federation. And we're going to look at the entity research and entity category section. We talk about what we're talking on the call about today. And it's this section right here, this button, launches into the apply space for things. So that's how to get enabled and get connected with the entity category. Cool. So let's talk a little bit about the technical side of things, just lightly. What supports R&S configurations today? So out of the box, Shibboleth and Simple SAML PHP, two open source and community research and education tools, have native configuration for this. Shibboleth, we have on our website, we actually have the code, the snippet that someone can cut and paste in for the attribute release policy. And it's very clear. Simple SAML PHP, I believe, has a configuration for it as well, for detecting the entity category in existence and then doing the attribute release. I don't have anything on CAS just yet. My initial investigation has shown that CAS is not entity category aware at this time. There may be the flexibility to write some rules, but it doesn't have the native configuration at this time. And if it does, and if someone is in the field that is aware of that, please definitely send us a note. We'd love to link it into our documentation. You also see on the right, my right, the bilateral first solution. So we talk about things in the trust identity space as multilateral, things that deal with a set of trust records. An aggregate is multilateral. So we're going to trust this set as opposed to just one-on-one. And something like Microsoft Active Directory, Oracle's OID, Ellucian, those kinds of other bilateral first solutions, they're designed with single point-to-point connections as their primary bread and butter. So that's a bilateral first solution space. What happens in the ADFS space, which is another platform that we just brought into under the umbrella of support, is that if you use Microsoft ADFS and you run ADFS Toolkit, you automatically get the research and scholarship entity category support by definition by using the ADFS Toolkit. So it's baked right into it and is available to those who want to use that. So we have stories for both open source platforms as well as one of the most predominant ones, Microsoft ADFS. So the doors are wide open here for this. So before I get into the ORCID side, I do want to offer up any other questions or comments that want to be made at this stage of the game. We'll let it hang. There we go. I guess not. So we'll continue on. So we're going to shift gears. We talked about what research and scholarship entity category is. We talked about the data that it allows to go over the wire and permits through the control of the IDP operator. When it sees an entity category, it says, if you're in this entity category, you're going to get these attributes. Now we're going to look at a particular one called ORCID. So this is about researcher identifiers. And now we're going to look at this as a trying to consume a service. So what is ORCID? So it's a researcher identifier, and think of it as a researcher ID that is agnostic to the organization that they belong to. So it's like a researcher, so like a social insurance number, a researcher, the researcher number. And using that ID, you can decorate or you can create your research, not your curriculum, your body of work that you've collected and you have in your CV, and you can link it together with that. Many of the challenges that are out there in the space, for instance, I have a challenge with a very common email address on Google, as well as Chris Phillips here in Ottawa as a hockey player. But it also, because my email address on Gmail is very short, I get a lot of other Chris Phillips's email. Some of them are in the United States that are doctors, some are getting bank statements, and some are getting flight requests, and some are just getting Christmas cards. But really this disambiguation of who that person is what ORCID is about, and we're going to get into that in just a moment. Just checking the chat window here. Okay. I assume that the chat is publicly viewable by all? Okay, great. So there's an observation here. If my organization is considering rolling out a researcher CV, then they can use ORCID instead. Definitely take that into consideration. I would really seriously consider that, because that is what ORCID is all about. So I think there's a great story about complementing and building out researcher CV stories there as well. Okay. A little bit more detail. I am going to break in back out of the presentation more into the browser, navigating what ORCID is. I'm actually going to do a sign on to my ORCID record, and you'll see that in just a moment. So it's free for us users. You create your record, and the other way I explain it a little bit is it's like LinkedIn, but for your research. But in the case of LinkedIn, which is a commercial organization that has a revenue mandate to earn money off of you, ORCID does not have that. So this free for your users is funded by the access to the content. And there's a strong sense of privacy preservation here, and privacy by design in the design of ORCID, and you'll see it in just a few minutes. So there's API calls, and to the comment about the My Campus Researcher CV, there are API calls that you can use to say, here are my institution's research outputs. You can do those kinds of queries. The other thing is about being able to connect it to your on-campus projects. A lot of your library organizations are going to have a keen interest in this space, especially your VPs of research, when they're trying to gather their research outputs and do summary reports. The API is used for synchronization of research outputs and publications is a critical point on that. So as we think about federated ID, we're flipping over to the what is ORCID really strong at, and what is its value proposition, and it's a complementary component to federated identity, because this is about researchers and content creators having a public unique identifier that then is used to link their creation, their publishing, their outputs, that they can assert authorship. So Chris, I authored a particular blog posting, or I created a different paper, but it's not the Chris Phillips that is the doctor that made something or published a paper in the science journal. Same thing with employers or those publishers that they actually do assertions, and this is how the APIs are the strong point, that those assertions come into your record as well, and you get to accept the attestation that yes, Nature said that this was Chris's article that was published. Chris is an employee of that organization. As well as you can link in your funding and award associations for a more public record. So this is just a very 20, 30,000 foot view on things. Here in Canada, Canary assisted the Canadian Research Knowledge Network, CRKN, to join ORCID, and using a consortium model. And what that means is that that for-fee API access is a way for those systems to be interconnected in there. And so those interconnected systems don't necessarily use Federated ID for sign-on, but they use, I believe, an OAuth 2 connection to deal with machine or system-to-system authentication, saying, what is my API key to sign into things? Now, when I say sign in, it's for the machine, your on-campus CV system, to be able to talk to the ORCID API. So that's a different kind of thing. And if you want to get into more details about the ORCID consortium, please let us know, and we'll be able to connect you with the right people. Let's check in the chat window here. Okay. Good thing I left the visual cues in my presentation deck. So let's minimize this. Okay. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to visit ORCID, and I'm actually going to sign in. So if you're not affiliated with an organization and you visit ORCID for the first time, you do get asked to create an account, and that account is only at ORCID. However, not only do I have a local account, but I've linked it with my institutional account, and this is the one I use for my sign-ins. And I'm affiliated with Queen's University, and so remember in the first slide about the arrows that are going along and say the discovery interface? I'm going to call out in each of these different sites I visit, particularly here in ORCID, but what the discovery interface is about. So if I click allow to pick from a list, this is every identity provider in the global ecosystem. Very, very large, right? So discovery is it's a challenging space, but it can be made easy for the user because, as you can see, I've been here before, and it's already given me the visual cues of where I should enter in from. I've clicked through, and now I'm going through that user ID and password page that you saw on the Canary Identity Provider, and then I'm signing into my record. So this is the behind-the-scenes record view of my ORCID. So if I wanted to offer someone the public view, this is my ORCID record here. I'm just going to use this, do an incognito window. And this is what the public sees. So if any of you who are on the call have to deal with researcher curriculum vitae, any of the employment, some of the works, so this is really highly geared towards the researcher and the things that they get evaluated on in their research. So from a permission side of things, there's a lot of instrumentation of who can see what and what information that are in each and every one of these, and it's a very rich detail. So the API access, which we're not going to get into here, but I just do want to make a couple comments. I hand entered this work on my own, and I linked it in manually. However, if I were a researcher that was running a larger lab or had a lot of more outputs, I would be getting a lot more activity. I would be delegating this down to others to link in this research. As well, when I go to funding bodies and say, well, what did Chris do? What was his research outputs in this particular period? This is where I would get and offer others to see the information. And so that activity of keeping things current is the API access to ORCID. So that's about the API access. However, this is a conversation about research and scholarship. So what is the material difference for that single sign-on? Well, when I signed in, the Canary Identity Provider, I did not have to write a rule on that to say, if I see orcid.org as my entity ID, release these set of attributes. We have one policy that says, when I see research and scholarship entity category, release the attributes. And then it just works. So this is just a quick visualization of some of the things. I'm just going to jump to the chat window.
Just a quick question.
Sure.
Start with this.
Does not pull the NBI logo values. The MDI logo stuff, I'm not sure about the logo values. I'd have to check with the service provider, ORCID here. And is lecture speech content type in ORCID's records? I think it is, but if you don't have your ORCID record, join ORCID and attempt to sign on using your federated ID. We'll get into some of those institutions in just a moment. So I'm going to flip back to the presentation, just keeping an eye on time. So you heard in a previous slide, was it 2 slides ago? We talked about this ORCID consortium. So these institutions are the kickoff members, 31 members that were the seed organization. Says, yes, we're going to pay to be part of the consortium to get privileged access to the APIs. And when we look at them and say, how many are already CAF members? 9 of the 31 are already CAF members, and they are all actually using the sign-on to ORCID today. We were having a great conversation with the ORCID.org folks, and we got some visibility on just which identity providers were truly functioning. And we know that 3 of those 9 that we're using in the consortium are already using the R&S. They're already decorated with the R&S Entity Category. So I'm sure the first question says, well, what about the other 6? Well, what those other 6 did is they did just regular standard classic attribute release. When I see the ORCID record, do this. So they had a phone call from someone and said, we need access, and they needed to set up access. I believe the utilization level right now across Canada is somewhere about, I think number of sign-ons in the last handful of months is about just approaching 1,000 sign-ons. So in the grand scheme of things, we're a drop in the bucket, but from a utilization rate, I think we have a pretty good footprint inside the ORCID ecosystem itself, and we also want to grow that. And this is what this talks about. So if we remove the context of, well, just ORCID, the consortia, do I have to be part of the consortia to get an ORCID? No. You can be anyone to get an ORCID, and you can sign in locally if you don't have an affiliation. But if you do have an affiliation, you can sign in using your identity provider. So if we think of all across Canada, how many people are actually using ORCID to sign in? We have a record of 21 IDPs signing into and using ORCID federated sign-on, which is about 39% of the overall CAF ecosystem, which tells us that the uptake has been really great in the last 2 years, but there's also still more value to attain. And as we're talking about things and the research and scholarship conversation, you'll see in a few moments why it's a really big unlock to enabling services. So where do we get the services is the next question. And we, as a small federation in the grand scheme of things, 70% of the services come from 2 other federations. The UK Federation, which has got a number of years on us, as well as INCOM in the United States. Between those 2 federation operators, 70+% of the services originate from them. There's more and more federations adopting EduGain as the federation bridge, and that is where that's the sort of the nexus or the crossroads of where the entries are being exchanged. So if you're an organization that wants to say, I have researchers who participate globally, this is literally the place and where it's manifest. So our exchanging of attributes between ourselves and EduGain and you guys and the IDP operators, enabling them, are critical to that success. And speaking of that, one of the things that we have available to us are a variety of tools. So as a participant in a global ecosystem, we don't always have to build, or every member of that EduGain organization doesn't have to build their own tools. There's a lot of tools that are done centrally. So in order to realize the full benefit of federation and federated ID and these services outside your organization, the real question is, well, are we running? Are we operating properly? So take a look at technical.edugain.org/entities. I'm actually going to jump there right now. We have a couple of screenshots. I'm going to do that. And then we take a look at, there's a variety of tools here. So what I'm looking at is the entities database, and I'm going to look for the Canary IDP. So to an earlier question about these extra entity categories, there's a lot of them. As you can tell, that some of them are very specific to different federations, such as the Renata, the France Federation. They've chosen to take a model where entity categories are already curated inside where they have a collaborative documentation, e-learning, software, etc. So they decorate their entity categories inside the federation. We don't filter them, but not everyone globally does the same thing, is the story. So let's take a look at the idp.canary.ca as our record. And this is our record in EduGain. And if you want to take a look up your own record, this is the place to do it. And when we look at the entity details, these are the details that we have about us. So we have the Research and Scholarship Entity Category here. And if I look at the ECCS link, this is what we had in the screenshot, and this is what happens, and this is how EduGain, the centralized service, does incremental testing every other day or so to see what your performance is on, are you configured properly and correctly? All this is to say, to make sure your researchers have a dial tone when they sign into their services, rather than saying, oh, where's the problem? And having to hunt and peck on various things. So we're very big on tools and instrumentation. So I'm actually at the end of the presentation about the R&S content. I am going to jump into a couple of other examples. But really I want to drive home the story about when you use R&S, and if you're creating a service in Canada today that you think is going to be used across Canada, even by one or two or other organizations, really seriously consider the R&S element as one of those base expectations. I think that the value that you gain as a service operator is that if you say we are an R&S entity or an organization that supports that, all those IDPs that are already doing R&S are going to be available just working without any conversations, as opposed to having a call or conversation per identity provider. In the long view, we want all IDPs in CAF to have R&S standing. That's really the story here, is that when you get to that level, then things just start working and it's much more sustainable. You do it once and it works with many services. So to give you a sort of a footnote to that, or an example of that, what I did is I went to, to help elaborate or give some more examples, I went to the tools, the entity database, I clicked on service providers, and then I did another extra filter saying, hey, research and scholarship, how many services are there worldwide? And I tap show here. And there's 189 services across 19 federations. The reality is every institution is not going to need all 189 services. So what I did is this is something that the EduGain and the operators are under working towards, is a better service catalog about way to render content on discoverability of services that are useful, as opposed to navigating this, which is friendly for us technical type, but in fact it's probably very friendly for us as a technical audience, but for layperson, not so friendly. So what I've done is I've just sort of cherry picked a couple of things. One is File Sender is a piece of software that is built in Europe, but is deployed in a number of different locations. I do see a sort of a chat request in the window, so one moment here. Are there any R&S services operated in Canada? There's right now science.canary.ca is tagged as an R&S service, and we're working with science.canary.ca to render R&S first as the discovery and then the rest of the Access Federation. Because right now, science.canary.ca uses a whitelist approach and saying, hey, we know these ones work, rather than show someone that doesn't work. There are some in the queue that are coming up and coming as well. And so we have a question about, or observation about, CI logon requires CertFi in addition to R&S. So CertFi, okay. So CertFi is another designation. It's not an entity category. It's more of a security designation. And in the conversation about what is CertFi, it's a designation to say that, and once tagged, just like an entity category says R&S, this behaves and walks and talks like the Research and Scholarship Entity Category, and we have this Canadian, us here at Canary, we have a process that says join the R&S. This is about the same kind of story. It's an attestation by an organization about what certify procedures you follow along the lines of security responsiveness. And what it does in the Canadian Access Federation and others metadata is it decorates their entity record with a contact that is declared as just a security contact. And that security contact has, that entity is agreed with the principles on the cert file. I'm just sort of taking a read of, so Darren, I think I've kind of called out what it is before I get to the next question. CertFi is one of the things we're looking at as well, and we'll have more to say on that in the coming months. The CertFi story is, I think, really a great one that complements other things. And as Darren points out, CI login requires CertFi. So not only does CI logon, if we look at the record in the EduGain system here, and if I say service providers and I say CI logon, this is their record, this is the service, and it has research scholarship, and it's registered by InCommon, and I believe it has the CertFi is asserted. Now, this component in the research R&E space is CI login is used by other subcomponents, and they require both R&S and certified designation, which is why we're interested in it. Now, Florent, you had a question about very few universities release R&S today in Canada. Do you know why? Lack of information? Maybe researchers not aware of the services available and not pushing it to campus IT? Yes to all of the above, really. And this is what we've been engaged with CUCIO since the commencement of our support of R&S, and actually earlier, because we want CUCIO as the Council of University CIOs to also convey this important message that when institutions want to support their global researchers, attribute release is an important part of that. And look at what happens already with your directories and your white pages and the directory listings for your staff. We want that parity, that same parity and attribute release there, and also respecting the needs for those students and grad students who have that designation. Beyond why or the lack of information, we're working very hard on trying to get this out, and this is one of the reasons we're having the webinar today and are recording it, is we want to have this as a standing body of piece of information that we can refer to. We're also working with other researchers on a case-by-case basis as needed. And working with Compute Canada, which Darren is with, R&S is a big piece of some of the things that we see coming down the pipe with them.
There's another question asked.
Okay, thank you.
This one might be separate.
Okay. Is it possible for institution IDPs to inform users what information is being released to each service provider doing logon? Absolutely. There sure is. So that is the notion of consent. And the Shibboleth IDP has baked in consent facilities that I believe are well exceed the needs for anyone across Canada, whether you're in Ontario or British Columbia or any of the eastern provinces, which also have some strict privacy guidelines. So there is consent built into there. So if an organization wanted to turn on R&S and they activated consent for those services, I think you have a really compelling platform. Just do it. And if you want more, please reach out to us, tickets@canary.ca. Our IDP installer has this already built into it for consent to be enabled on by default. We also have a build tool that you can see it in a matter of minutes to see what it looks like. There's a comment by Darren here saying, I think Cyber might utilize R&S for their account sign-up process to get a rapid access cloud. We at Compute Canada would like to use CAF with R&S attribute release for account sign-up as well. Absolutely. And this is what we also see, is that if we have a prevalence of R&S being across Canada and high uptake, and it's like an immunization where that vaccine effect happens, where there's more than having it than not, it just becomes that much more coverage. And with Federated ID, we're not looking to replace or supplant existing identity systems, because in Darren's example of that account sign up, there's other things that get decorated on someone's account. But that organization can divest themselves of managing password. So that's just a first principles value proposition. So keep the questions coming. As we do, what I'm doing is I'm just going to keep myself signed in. Or actually, what I may do is, no, I'll keep myself signed in. So all I'm going to do is I cherry-picked certain entities out of the EduGain listing here. I'm going to go back one. Oh, pardon me, maybe one more. No, my search results did not persist. So I'll get serious. See, I log on. So what I did, just as a quick search, the 189. I did just an eyeball thing, and I looked at Internet 2 has a component called File Sender. File Sender is a piece of software that's open source, built for and by the research and education community. And when I choose login here, I've already been here, as you can see. And now I'm signed in. And now I have this, this is a custom piece of software that instead of trying to send giant files through the mail system, we know that mail, not everyone has the resources of Google, and many people have mail systems that cap sizes at around 10 megabytes or something like that. Everyone will find the maximum size very quickly. So if you want to send a very large file, this is one way to do it. And it's a federated sign-on. The file gets deleted after the expiry date, and it's a fire and forget. But it uses Federated ID to sign in. And as you can see at the Internet 2 URL, it's not operated by us, and it just works because we have an R&S rule that is enabled for that. Additionally, again, another one of those that doesn't work. In Italy, there's a skills platform about the badging, open badge, about building competencies and such. Is this something that some organization in Canada would want to roll out, or is this something they would want to partner with? Well, there's a lot of people who want to kick the tires on things, and what I would like to do is I actually would like to log into this. So this is their discovery experience. So again, you can log in with a local account, but you can also get access to your institution here. It has more of a predictive search, which as I just started typing, and this is what comes from the Italian Federation, GAR. And again, because Canary is part of EduGain and our IDP is published in EduGain, I get to use my home credential and I'm signed in to this tool. So if I see my badges in progress, I have nothing. There's this application, and I didn't have to reveal my user ID and password to this service, and neither did the home institution have to worry about, is Chris reusing his password when you see the user ID and password box? We know in phishing situations that that's a very risky proposition of just people are just, I don't want to remember another password. Get rid of that fatigue. Start using Federated ID. Another one is Science Gaia, which is, I guess, a EU. Just because it has the EU designation. I don't know physically where it is. Now, these are online courses. Oh, look at that. I didn't realize that. How to turn a web-based service into a service provider in identity federations. How about that for serendipity? So I'm going to choose sign in. Again, if we take a look at the discovery experience, this one's a little bit different. The discovery is operated by Grid IDP, a member of the EduGain organization. It's not necessarily a regional federation. It's more of a federation of a group. So I'm choosing EduGain for the sign-on. And I'm going to be asked for a different institution here, a different way to search for it, which is their discovery model. So my search results, I'm going to select Canary. I can choose to remember for a session, remember for a week. Again, these are conveniences for users. And now I'm signed in. I didn't go, when I tested this just before the call, I didn't go any further because what I wanted to do is give you guys a glimpse at, well, just because Chris came in with Federated ID, does my application have what's the span of control? it's as much as little as you want it to be. So there's a public username. It's populated for my information in RIDP. And there's this, for the application, they have this honor code. So I can change this and sign in. Now I'm going to agree here and go, air quotes, create an account. So there's my information. And there was a comment a few minutes ago about consent. I can very much appreciate how consent would be that interstitial, that moment in time saying, do you want this information to go here? It's baked into Shibboleth. You can turn it on. It'll just start working. You do need a little bit more than just turning on. It's more of a communication experience with consent than it is just can I technologically do it. Let's see, I think I had one more. So the other one is just, again, I just navigated around to a couple places that I think are good exemplars on things. So this is Indico, which is in Sweden, or this particular, oh, I guess I'm still signed in. So I'm going to choose logout. Now logout, for those on the call, single logout is really, really tough. So single logout really means close the browser. Because what's happening is you have session cookies that are still valid, and it's not going to log me out of any of these other tabs. So I've signed into those things locally, but I just wanted to call that out because I wanted to go back. Or maybe they didn't. I have to refresh. There. Now I have the login again. Now I'm not logged into this application. And now I'm going to go through the login process. Again, the discovery experience. So you can see there's kind of peaks and valleys in consistency on discovery. And part of that is many services want flexibility to control their destiny. And with that comes the challenges of how do you render the discovery experience. I've already been here. I'm using Canary, and I'm going to proceed to the login. Once again, I'm actually signed in. So the SAML request is going through over the wire. And now I'm here, and I can start as a named user going through the system. It didn't necessarily give me any elevated privileges. I just became the named user. That's it. And I think with that, these are just some examples on what does this look like and feel like in the field. And I think it feels, for me, I think it's really exciting to see that there's a lot of ease here. We have to do our homework in the background on getting services turned up. But what we also need to do is make it a lot easier for the people in the field to do the safe and secure thing, is not reuse user ID and passwords out in the field, and also understand where we can audit things. So from an onboarding side of things, and this is our last slide, we'll open up to questions. If you haven't already applied to CAF, it's just come visit the Canary website and submit your application. We ask for a trust assertion document, and we also ask the organization to sign a participation agreement. You may be surprised at how challenging sometimes signing the document is, but it's really important because trust is built on agreements, and the agreements are built on legal trust. And if an organization is not able to consummate those agreements, do you want them in the federation? So these are things that we think about on a day-to-day basis, and we want to be really open to the right services coming in for the right reasons and the right times. So if you have projects on campus and someone is spinning up a project, those agreements are usually going to come from the campus side of things. We also have, as you move in and doing the onboarding, you do an installation of the identity provider, of which we have the IDP installer or the ADFS toolkit. And as you heard at the beginning of the call, apply or join for the R&S Entity Category right at the beginning, or if you're already there, to apply now. And then we talked a little bit about the enabling of the R&S Entity Category. It's already baked into ADFS Toolkit. If you're running Shibboleth, it's already available. We have our release notes there. And as you can see, I hope you appreciate that. Certainly I did a little bit of cherry picking from the list, but the ease of accessing the services means that you've reduced the friction for those researchers to just do the right thing. And with that, we have a few minutes left for Q&A. There's either a Q&A window or the chat window. Okay. Thanks, Corey. Any questions or any thoughts? I have a couple people in the room. Did I miss anything? Okay.
Possibly, if anyone's interested in ORCID, we have that webinar.
Yeah. May 10th? Okay. Yeah. So we do have, there's another webinar that's coming up on May 10th with the ORCID Consortium. The people on this call here and the Canary Access or Canadian Access Federation list, we'll see about getting you an invite as well, because it will be a different audience, a different circle of people. Much of the content you have seen today is going to be very familiar, and so it's going to be for a different audience. So my suggestion for you is, if you think you have a librarian or a researcher that needs to know more about the ORCID or a deeper dive in that space than we had today, what I mean by deeper dive is more deeper dive for them, not technical, but more of the value proposition about the ORCID side of things, because we want them to be knocking on your door and saying, hey, I want to use this service, or we want to reveal to them, hey, I didn't know this service was available, and that's up and coming. We can talk offline there, Corey, about the discovery stuff. This is just so you know, both for Corey and others on the call and the recording, discovery is a big issue and a big focus point in the last 6 months, 12 months. There's ra21.org, which is focused on the publisher's side of house. And when you think about the services, they're not the publishers. But having a great story around discovery and great utilization is always something that we're thinking about as well. So we participate with those activities. And I think with that, I'm going to call the call closed. Any other questions? Going once. Yeah. Thanks, Florent. Thanks everyone else on the call too. I really appreciate you taking your time out of your day today, and we hope to add another great time 1 month from now. Same place, same time. Thanks very much, and have a great day.